Hello and welcome back to our programming for the Virtual African Bird Fair 2021. Next, we have a series of short talks on birding destinations across Africa. As with our South African birding destination session, we are focusing this year on 3 underrated and underexplored birding areas. So, if you would like to take the road less traveled and be rewarded with birding riches, you will enjoy these 3 presentations. Dr. Dominic Rowlandson of Birding Ecotours takes us to Maputo Special Reserve in Mozambique. Dr. Daniel Dankwitz from Rock Jumper Birding Tours tells us about his childhood stomping ground of Choma in Zambia. And lastly, Lau Gwyn from Tropical Birding guides us through the deserts of Morocco. Please enjoy.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me. My name is Dominic Rowlandson. I work for a bird tour company called Birding Ecotours. We've got offices all around the world. And I will be chatting to you today about Maputo Special Reserve, which is in southern Mozambique, and it's falling under the category of Africa's unknown birding gems, and it's which it certainly is. And I was lucky enough to visit reserve with my friends from BirdLife South Africa, so Andrew de Blok and Linda van der Heever, and we were asked to assess the reserve's agritourism potential. So for about 5 or 6 days, we drove around reserve and looked at things like infrastructure for birders and the different habitats, and of course what special birds can be seen which would attract birders to the area. And I'll be chatting to you telling you more about that today. So first off, probably the most important take home from my talk will hopefully be that the reserve is very accessible to South African birders. So this is the reserve here, the Maputo Special Reserve, which is formerly the Maputo Elephant Reserve, and it is a trans-frontier park. As you can see, it links up with Tembe Elephant Park, which is down here, so through the Futi corridor, which then links up with the main reserve, and then these areas, Machangulo, which is not part of the reserve, and Nhaka Island, which you might be more familiar with, and then of course Ponta d'Oro is right nearby, probably only 15-20 minutes away from the reserve. So we came from Johannesburg by the Komati Port border post. We went through Maputo and then down to the reserve. So this road from Maputo south to Ponta d'Oro is now all tarred. It used to take you a day to get from the border post to Maputo, but now that drive can be done in 2 hours, and it just takes an hour from Ponta d'Oro north to reserve or from Maputo south. So it really is very accessible and very easy to get to nowadays. And then it's important to note that although the reserve is very accessible, you do need a 4x4 to visit. It's very, very sandy tracks throughout the reserve, and it's simply not possible without a 4x4. So this is just a close-up of the map of the reserve. So we were staying in the park headquarters in this area here. And then there is now accommodation on the edge of Lake Chinguti, which is, I'd call it 5-star camping. Maybe not 5-star, but at least high-class camping. It's really, really impressive campsites. There is also camping at Ponta Mbene along the coast. And there's I think it's a 5-star lodge at Ponta Milibangalala. So a beautiful lodge there that overlooks the coastal forest and the ocean. So lots of accommodations, well, a number of accommodation options for you. This is just some shots as we headed south over the Maputo Bridge. This is over Maputo Bay, and the road really is like this for the rest of the drive, south to Maputo and to the border post. Just a few of the habitats which are found throughout the reserve. It's mostly coastal grasslands with little patches of coastal forest. So this is a nice shot of it. You can see the sandy roads in the background there. Quite a few big lakes, big freshwater lakes. And then some of these smaller lakes are where we expect to find things like Lesser Jacana, African pygmy goose, black cuckoos potentially in the neighboring grasslands. Lots of, as I mentioned, lots of these coastal forest patches. So we spend a lot of time birding these areas. This is on the edge of Lake Chinguti. This is actually where we had good numbers of swamp nightjars, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. This is now overlooking the Futi floodplain, and this is where we had an exciting sighting of a long-toed lapwing, which is quite rare in southern Mozambique. Then we were lucky enough to join the the park rangers on their coastal patrol. And so there are some really beautiful beaches and coastal habitat. I think the nice thing about Maputo Special Reserve is that Ponta de Ora is just half an hour away. So if you are fed up of the camping and feel like a nice meal and a Deutsche and beer, you can just pop across to Ponta de Ora. So some of the birds which we saw throughout the reserve, I'll tell you about them now. So to start off with the coastal forest patches, they were full up with Woodward's batis. They really were common, especially if you hone into their call. Crested guinea fowls are always quite comical with their crazy hairstyles. They were common in the coastal forest patches. We heard on the very early morning, or on a few early mornings and late evenings, we heard African barred owlets calling from the forest patches with their excited sort of whinnying call. So they certainly are around, and you definitely cannot overlook the trumped hornbills. They are very common in the reserve and of course very vocal with their baby-like cries. Eastern nicoters, we're quite surprised they weren't as common as we were expecting, but they certainly are around, especially if you are familiar with their call. More of a species you're likely to hear first rather than see. We only heard them on one occasion at our accommodation, but there's certainly lots of habitats around for them. This is an African wood owl, and we had many white-eared barbets. So this reminds me just how close we are to KZN, or coastal KZN, which I associate this bird with, and they're very common in the coastal forest patches. And surprisingly, we didn't hear any Narina trogons during our time there, but that could be that we were there in late March, so late summer, when they might not actually be calling. But we saw the one male during our time there. Lots of red-capped robin chats, trying to confuse us by mimicking crowned eagles and African fish eagles. And then brown scrub robin, they were incredibly common. So every forest patch seemed to have its own pair of brown scrub robin. And then of course turacos. So purple-crested turaco were very common, as were Livingston's turaco, which is more of a coastal species, and always fun to see these birds. Yellow-rumped tinkerbirds were very common throughout in all the forest patches, but less so were the red-fronted tinkerbirds. We actually didn't record them in our 5 days there, but they are known from the reserve. So you've got to keep a lookout for these birds in amongst the yellow-rumped tinkerbirds. Green malkoas, surprisingly not too common, but it could have been again that we were there in late summer, but they certainly are around in the forest patches. And then along the riverine forest, along the Futi River, we had a pair of southern-banded snake eagles. So it's always great to see these rare and endangered species. We didn't get these because we were there in summer, but in winter you do get spotted ground thrushes coming down to the coast, and they will be found in the coastal forest patches. And then we worked, there's nice patches of sand forests, particularly in the west of the reserve. And it's in these areas where we found some of the sand forest specials. So these being the near-god sunbird in amongst the many purple-banded sunbirds. Pink-throated twin spots. We also had green twin spots in the coastal forest. Always fun to see these birds. And then Rudzapalis. They were actually very common, but more in the sand forest sections, whereas yellow-breasted Apalis were in the coastal forest. So we didn't get any plainback sunbirds during our time there, but they are known from the Maputo Special Reserve. And of course, they're known from Tembe Elephant Park in neighboring South Africa. And the Futi corridor actually links up with the Maputo Special Reserve. And so we expect to find them probably in good numbers in the Futi corridor. So that's certainly one to keep a lookout for. African broadbills are around in the coastal forest and in the sand forest patches, and lots of different bushwhacks. So many gorgeous bushwhacks. Of course, they always very difficult to see. Grey-headed bushwhacks were around, as were orange-breasted bushwhacks. And in the sand forest areas, we also had Rex's helmet shrikes. Unfortunately, no thick-billed cuckoos, which are their brood parasites, but always one to keep a lookout for. And quite an exciting prospect there in southern Mozambique. I'll tell you a little bit now about some of the coastal grassland birding. So we had lots of grey-rumped swallows in amongst the thousands of barn swallows. So they were great to see. Along the Futi floodplain, or along the edge of the Futi floodplain, I should say, we had black cuckoos. Again, you often pick them up first on call, but they are certainly around, and it was a great bird to see. Not a bird we encountered during our few days there, but Denham's bustards are known from the coastal grasslands, potentially also moving in high numbers in winter from the high areas of South Africa. Senegal lapwings, we actually didn't see them during our time there, but we did hear them flying over our accommodation at night. So they'll certainly be in the coastal grasslands somewhere. And unfortunately, we didn't have views like this of quailfinch, but basically just about every patch of open grassland had good numbers of quailfinch. And if you are familiar with their call, you'll realize just how common they are in the area. They fly over quite high in small little flocks. Collared pattern coals were seen, a big flock of them was seen at the Futi floodplain, so they're around 2. And then the fun thing about Maputo Special Reserve birding is the huge numbers of bee-eaters around. So there really were blue-cheeked bee-eaters in the open areas, just about everywhere we went. Always pretty birds to see. European bee-eaters, another summer migrant, and then small numbers of would get them in pairs of the little bee-eaters. And then one of our exciting finds during our time there was olive bee-eater. So we had a couple pairs of, or a couple of small groups, I should say, of olive bee-eaters out in the grasslands and the open areas, and actually we had them alongside blue-cheek bee-eaters. So quite an interesting bird. They breed on Ntaka Island, but don't make it 100 kilometers further south into South Africa. And there's still only under a dozen records, if that, of olive bee-eater in South Africa. So I think more exploration of the areas of northern Maputoland, northern KZN, should reveal more olive bee-eater records, and especially if you are aware of their call and how different it is to blue-cheeked bee-eater. That will certainly help find them. And always a difficult bird to lay eyes on, but black-rumped buttonquails are in the coastal grasslands. Actually very rare to get even a photo like this. Most of the sightings are of flush birds as you drive through the grasslands. And as I mentioned earlier, we had good numbers of swamp nightjars. So along Lake Chinguetti, there were many different birds calling, and we had really good views of them. Not a bird we encountered, but rosy-throated longclaw are known from the Maputo Special Reserve, and there's certainly lots of habitat around for it. We did explore a few areas where they could occur, but didn't actually find them. But certainly a bird to keep an eye out for. And then just to tell you about some of the wetland birds and riverine birds in the park. So Eastern Garden Weaver is probably the most common weaver around, and in amongst them are smaller numbers of southern brown-throated weavers. And along the Futi River, we had small flocks of these red-headed quilliers flying by. They weren't looking like this, but more like this in their winter dress. So that's another really good bird to keep a lookout for. And we had good numbers of, or lots and lots, I should say, of rufous winged cisticulars, basically on the edges of every wet area in the damp grasslands. There'd be rufous winged cisticulars around. Along the Futi floodplain, there are lots of waterfowl, including beautiful little birds like blue-billed teal, which is formerly horned teal. And the find of our few days in Maputo Special Reserve was long-toed lapwing. So this is similar to olive bee-eater in the fact that it's very, very rare in South Africa, probably half a dozen records, maybe a dozen records in the last 50 years. We actually chatted to a contractor in the park who is also a birder, and he told us he'd seen them a couple of months before at Lake Chinguetti, which is a different area to where we saw this bird. So that's quite an exciting prospect that these birds could be around in decent enough numbers or small numbers, and could venture into South Africa. And then just to finish off, I'll tell you about some of the birds we had along the coastal areas. So the coastal birding is not as great as it could be because there's no estuaries or no big estuaries coming into the ocean there, the Indian Ocean. But we did have lesser crested terns along the coast, quite a few little terns. There's greater crested terns too, Eurasian whimbrel. And of course, being in southern Mozambique, you should keep a lookout for steppe whimbrel, the Albo axillaris race of Eurasian whimbrel, which has these very pale or white, I should say, auxiliaries. So as you can see, this says barred auxiliary, so it's Eurasian wimble and not a steppe wimble, but they could well be around too. Of course, they were found or discovered in Africa by Gary Orford in Maputo, so just up the road. We also had Terex sandpipers around and lots of white-fronted plovers. And some of the areas towards Mtaka Island could well have good numbers of greater sand plovers, lesser sand plovers, and maybe even crab plover. And just to conclude, I'd like to say a little bit about birding eco-tours. So we specialize in small group and custom-made birding tours around the world. We visit all 7 continents, and we'd really love to have you on tour with us. So please have a look at our website at birdingecotours.com and get in touch should you be keen to join us. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in to my presentation at the Virtual African Bird Fair 2021. Today it's going to be my absolute pleasure to introduce you to a region of southern Zambia that I'm extremely passionate about, given that this is the region of Zambia in which I actually grew up. Now, aside from visiting family, I take every opportunity I possibly can to get back to this area, just in that it's one of the richest birding destinations in all of Central Africa. And although I might be a little bit biased in saying that, I'm 100% certain I could generate some support for that, and I hope some of that support will come from the end of my presentation today. Now, when asked to present about a hidden birding destination that's often forgotten, my mind immediately went to the Choma region in southern Zambia, just in that we as Southern African birders are so passionate about regional listing, and I thought to break away from that and highlight a region that is just over the boundary of the sub-region, in which many of Southern Africa's most sought after species can very easily be found, much more easily than to the south of the Zambezi within the sub-region. And of course, there's a number of species that don't necessarily cross the Zambezi and so haven't yet found their way into our Southern African bird books. So where exactly is Choma? Well, Choma is a small farming town, the administrative capital of Southern Province in Zambia. The town itself is located on the Great North Road, which was initially intended to travel all the way from Cape Town up into Cairo. The town itself is situated about 300 kilometers southwest of Lusaka, which is the capital city of Zambia, and about 200 kilometers northeast of Livingstone, which is the main town of Victoria Falls. Obviously, the town of Victoria Falls is in the neighboring country of Zimbabwe. The town of Choma is very easily accessible along this Great North Road. It's a paved road and very easy driving, but it also provides easy access to the neighboring countries of Botswana and Namibia through the border towns of Kasane and Katima Mulilo. And many Southern African birders will know that these towns on the opposite side of the Zambezi River, Victoria Falls, Kasane and Katima Mulilo, are absolutely essential stops on any bird watching trip up through the Caprivi Strip. And so a visit to Choma is an extremely easy addition to any bird watching tour through this region. Now, as I mentioned, the town itself is located on the T1 road, which is the Great North Road that runs diagonally from southwest to northeast through Zambia, providing very easy access to the town itself. The town features a number of shopping facilities, diverse accommodation options, so there's a lot of infrastructure for visiting birders. Just to the north of the town is the main area that you'll want to focus on, driving about 5 kilometers north of the town along the M11, you reach the Nkanga River Conservation Area. Now, this is a BirdLife International recognized important bird area, which covers 9,700 hectares over 3 different commercial farms. Now, these farms have a dual land use purpose. They are commercial farms, both agricultural and livestock, but both pastoral and with livestock. But large portions of these properties have been set aside as a conservation area. This area has been fenced in, and indigenous game animals have been reintroduced into the area. The habitat is managed to protect the ecological integrity of the conservancy to benefit both the flora and fauna, and obviously that includes the local bird life. Now, the conservancy is named after the Nkanga River, which flows through the center of this conservancy, and the Nkanga River is named after the helmeted guinea fowl, with the name Nkanga translating to the guinea fowl in the local Zambian language that's spoken within this area. Now, what makes this region so special? Well, Choma and Zambia as a whole are situated right at the dead center of what's known as the Anglo-Zambesian ecological zone, which covers about 60% of all of the Central African sub-region within Africa. Now, this ecological region extends from Angola in the west all the way through to Tanzania and Mozambique in the east, and from northern Tanzania right up in the north, all the way down to southern Zimbabwe and southern Mozambique. Zambia, of course, is at the dead center of this ecological zone. So in terms of gaining access to these habitats, Zambia is often the starting point. Now, many of the countries that you see in this map don't necessarily have endemic species. Zimbabwe doesn't have a single endemic species, for example. Zambia only has 2 endemic species, for example. However, the ecological zone, this Anglo-Zambesian ecological zone, has a number of different endemic species that can be found throughout this area. And of course, Zambia being right at the dead center of the ecological zone is often the main starting point for people trying to catch up with these species. Of course, some of them do extend south into Zimbabwe and into southern Mozambique, but to really have the best chances of seeing these species, one has to cross the Zambezi into southern Zambia, and Choma provides a fantastic starting point to catch up with many of these species. Now, this ecological zone is dominated by what's known as Miombo woodlands. And for those who don't know Miombo woodland is an almost park-like woodland with a closed canopy, but an extremely open understory. In terms of the bird life, this habitat is dominated by a number of really interesting habitat specials that remain in this woodland year-round, implying that this is a woodland that you can visit at any time of year. There isn't a distinct seasonality. However, the brachystegia trees that dominate this woodland are deciduous, implying that during the winter months, they entirely lose their leaves, and the leaves grow back in spring and early summer. And it's at these times that this woodland creates the most incredible mosaic of color. So spring and early summer are definitely my favorite times in terms of Miombo birding. Now, the brachystegia trees have a liking for extremely well-drained sandy soils. So this woodland often grows on ridge tops. And these ridge tops drain into what are known as dambos. Now, dambos are shallow depressions that become seasonally inundated in the summer months. In the winter months, this habitat is completely dry. The clay that dominates the soil becomes extremely hard, but during the winter months, these areas become during the summer months, these areas become completely waterlogged, and it's at these times that a number of really interesting bird species visit these habitats to spend the summer. And we're talking flufftails and crakes and all things fantastic. Now, to look at the birds of Choma, well, I'd first like to highlight that this particular region of Zambia is famous for having held the Global Big Birding Day record for in excess of 33 years. In the year 1974, a team managed to see 273 species of bird within a 24-hour period, and this record was held until the year 1999, where another team managed to see an absolutely whopping 302 species within a 24-hour period. And this just speaks to the overall biodiversity of the area in question. But to look at things more generally, 440 species are known to occur in the region. And of course, as I mentioned before, it is listed as an important bird area. And this is because 40 species occur above the 1% population threshold within the area, which is totally staggering. Now, this includes a full complement of the Miombo woodland endemics, barring 1 or 2 species that prefer a very specific microhabitat within the Anglo-Zambesian ecological region. And this area is the stronghold for Zambia's main endemic bird species, the Chaplin's barbet. And I'll include some photos of that species in a few moments' time. And lastly, given its position, Choma serves as an absolutely fantastic place from which to explore the surrounding areas and other important bird areas within easy reach. We're talking either a day trip or a half-day trip, are the Machil IBA, which is the stronghold for the other endemic bird to Zambia, the black-cheeked lovebird, which of course is familiar to Southern African birders. The Mozio-Tunya National Park and Batoka Gorge are obviously very close in the town of Livingston. Kafue Flats is nearby, and then Choma provides very easy access to Kafue National Park, which is the largest national park in all of Zambia. To have a look at the birds that occur in Zambia, starting off, of course, with Zambia's main endemic bird species, this is the Chaplin's, otherwise known as the Zambian barbet. Now, this is a very peculiar bird. Its plumage is almost entirely white, relieved only by the small red mask and the brown wing panel. This bird has a mutualistic relationship with the sycamore figs, which grow abundantly through the dambos within certain parts of Choma, certain parts of Zambia, and Choma is, as I mentioned before, the stronghold for the species. Now, this bird is incredibly easy to find. One simply has to find a fruiting fig tree, and each individual tree, sycamore tree, has its own fruiting regime, which means that the barbets have a dependable food source and the trees need not compete individually in terms of seed dispersal, and the barbets are the main seed carriers for this species. So, fascinating bird. Zambia's other endemic bird species is the black-cheeked lovebird. This bird has long been suspected to occur within the Mopani woodlands on the Caprivi Strip. However, extensive surveys within those areas haven't been able to find the species, and as such, it's been uplisted as an endemic bird to Zambia. Now, this species is one of the most localized parrots in the world, with an extent of occurrence under 5,000 kilometers squared. So really a tiny little portion of southwestern Zambia, and this is within very easy reach of Choma itself. This bird doesn't necessarily occur within Choma, but it's very, very close by. In terms of other species to see, species that will be very familiar to Southern African birders that tend to be associated with the Miombo woodlands are the white-crowned black or Arnott's chat, the spotted creeper, one of my absolutely favorite birds, white-breasted cuckoo shrike, and Sousa's shrike. Now, as I mentioned before, many of these species are a lot easier to find on the northern flanks of the Zambezi relative to in areas in Zimbabwe and neighboring Botswana and Namibia. And this is perhaps no better illustrated by the white-crowned black or Arnott's chat, which actually breeds under the eaves of many of the lodges that birders tend to stay at when visiting the Choma area. Other species, some of which may be unfamiliar to Southern African birders, are the racket-tailed roller, Shelly sunbird, thick-billed cuckoo, all fairly common within this area, and then the Miombo-pied barbet, one of the first species that occurs within this region, but doesn't cross the Zambezi. This bird is very similar in behavior, in plumage and structure to the more widespread acacia-pied barbet, but it tends to be associated with these brachystegia woodlands, and it is quite scarce throughout its range, but Choma is one of the premier sites to see this species. Within the riverine woodlands along the Nkanga River, species to look for include the Shallow's turako, the red-throated twin spot, collared palm thrush, and another species which will be familiar to Southern African birders that occurs very close by to the Choma area is the indescribable Ross's Turaco. At the ecotone between the woodlands and the grassland and dambo habitat, species that occur include the Cabanis's bunting, sooty chat, and other species that may not necessarily be familiar to southern African birders, but very similar in shape and structure to the ant-eating chat, which occurs widely in southern Africa. And then, of course, the sought-after black kukul. Within the dambos, there is an incredible diversity of really interesting bird species that occur. Although many of them can be quite challenging to see, it's incredibly rewarding to bird this habitat. It's a main wintering site for great snipe, and I've personally flushed up to 13 individual great snipe from a single pool in the Choma area before, so this bird can be exceptionally common within some years. Locust finch erupts in wet years. Striped crake occurs mainly on passage migration, and the species can be quite common if you hit the timing right. And very nearby is one of the main strongholds for the slaty egret. The same is true for the wattled crane. It occurs very nearby in exceptional numbers. Other species include the cuckoo finch. This is the main area from which a lot of the research on the species has been done. Lesser jacana, and then Fullerborn's longclaw, which is another one of these Central African birds that don't cross the Zambezi. The area is very well known for mammals, and in addition to many of the plains game that occur, southern Zambia is well known for its African elephant populations, Cape buffalo, hippo on some of the major rivers, and then a really interesting mammal that occurs quite commonly in this area is the serval, one of the most iconic cats in all of Africa. Really, really interesting animal, this. And of course, it would be an injustice to do a presentation on southern Zambia without highlighting the proximity of Choma to the Victoria Falls, one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, and really a fantastic addition to any birding trip to this area. Now, anyone who might be interested in visiting this area will be glad to know that there are a number of fantastic lodges on offer, and the Nkanga River Conservancy itself includes 2 different lodges as well as a campsite to cater for all different budgets and requirements. A lodge I would like to highlight is the Masuku Lodge, which is a famous birding lodge within southern Zambia. And this is the lodge that I mentioned in the beginning, where the arnot's chat quite literally nest under the eaves of the chalets. And on the last slide, I provide contact details for Masuku Lodge, Birdwatch Zambia, as well as the Nkanga River Conservation Area if you'd like to plan your visit. And I'd just like to acknowledge the photographers that graciously allowed me to use their images in my presentation today. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope to see you in southern Zambia before too long.
Hey folks, thanks for joining me today for this short talk. Lyle Gwynn from Tropical Birding Tours here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about one of my favourite areas for birding in the world, full stop. As a company, we run more than 100 tours a year to more than 70 destinations, so to say that this is one of my favourite places in the world is really saying something. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the deserts of the Maghreb in northwest Africa. Of course, that primarily means Morocco. So what makes Morocco so special? Now, there are a lot of things that make this country unique and worthwhile visiting as a birder. One of the main things is the safety. It's one of the safest countries in Africa, which breeds a very relaxed, calm, simple birding style where you can fully immerse yourself in the bountiful culture and landscapes without worrying, which is a big relief. It's also full of unique landscapes and experiences, as well as culture, food, and everything else you can shake a stick at. This is a truly unique part of the continent and part of the world, and is unlikely to be anything like you've experienced elsewhere, especially on the African continent. So for first-time visitors, it offers an exceptional experience. One of the things about Morocco and the deserts of the northwest especially is the primary focus is on quality over quantity of birds. Obviously it's not the tropics, you're not racking up hundreds of species, but what you are seeing is extremely special, very localized, and in some cases extremely tough to find anywhere in these birds' ranges. So it really is almost an essential destination for the travelling birder, and especially the travelling African birder.
So to give you a bit of context, Morocco sits right here in the northwest corner of Africa, and zooming out a little bit you can see that it's quite lush and green in the north where it borders Spain and Europe, but is quite rugged and stony in the centre, leading out to those red dune deserts there in the east, which is the edge of the Sahara. The two areas I'm focusing on here are mainly this tract of stony desert that extends out into the red dunes on the upper right there, and I'll briefly talk about the kind of coastal deserts of the bottom left box, just down there towards the end. So before you even get to the deserts, it's essential to cross the Atlas Mountains. Now these are no small mountain range, these are proper mountains. We're talking snow-capped, ice, the lot. These are real mountains. Of course they have a lot of birds within them, so travelling down towards the deserts, the birding kicks off in quite spectacular fashion with things like red-billed chough, contrasting nicely with the white snow, birds like crimson-winged finch, which is quite unique, and of course the endemic house bunting, which is slightly drabber but a special bird in its own right. Moving down a little bit in altitude, you start to enter these slightly more lush valleys amid the peaks. Now this is where we start to pick up special endemics like Levalence woodpecker on the right there, Tristram's warbler in the centre, and of course Atlas horned lark on the left, a rather spectacular bird, currently a race of horned lark, but well worth seeing.
So the first desert you come across will be the Stony Desert. Now this is the first step down from the Atlas and is the edge of the drier lands. This is one of my favourite areas. There are large expanses of open, stony, gravelly, deserty tracts of land, and on first glance they look lifeless. But when you stop and scan and listen, it's full of life.
So waking up and birding in the shadow of the Atlas, like here, is quite spectacular. Looking up at snow-capped peaks while you're birding in the desert is quite the thrill. Sunrises and sunsets are spectacular, and that's when we'll be out doing our most productive birding. Wheatears are abundant in this habitat. Things like red-rumped, white-crowned, western black-eared wheatears, as well as black wheatear, desert wheatear, pied wheatear, and of course the endemic Maghreb or western mourning wheatear. Probably the most spectacular of the bunch, a really dapper black and white colour scheme. It can be really tricky to track down, not at all common. Even within its relatively small range, it's extremely tricky to track down, but luckily there are a few reliable areas where we generally tend to find this amazing endemic. Of course, larks are a central theme. Birds like lesser short-toed, greater short-toed, Thekla lark, crested lark, as well as the local form of crested lark, which has an exceptionally long bill, known as Maghreb lark here in the upper right corner. And of course the thick-billed lark with the most enormous bill. Even on its own, this is almost worth birding in Morocco for. It's an absolutely spectacular bird and really is worth the effort. Of course there are other birds to keep an eye out for. Birding can be extremely productive in the mornings and the evenings with things like black-bellied sandgrouse, pin-tailed sandgrouse, trumpeter finches with their nasal wheezing calls constantly, cream-coloured courser, and a whole bounty of other birds along the way.
So one of the first images that comes to mind when we talk about Moroccan deserts is of course the Sahara, one of the world's largest, driest deserts, with its towering, rolling red dunes. And it's just an alien landscape. It's home to a whole bunch of special, unique, charismatic and enigmatic birds.
So although the excitement of the birding will have been building as you move down from the top of the Atlas through the stony desert, it really reaches its peak once you reach the dunes of the real Sahara, out beyond Erkchebi towards the Algerian border. So waking up to this view really lets you know you've arrived somewhere special. The traditional blue colours of Mazuga there, worn by the gentleman in the foreground. Things normally start off with a pretty spectacular display of sand grouse. It's something we're quite used to in southern Africa, but this is something else entirely. We're talking thousands of spotted sand grouse quite often. So with local guides that keep track of water sources, we normally arrive just in time for these birds to come in and drink first thing in the morning. And it makes for some exceptional experiences and views, but also photography. You can see here in the photo on the left, that's the end of my lens in the corner. And we were treated to just flock after flock of sand grouse coming through to drink. Now, among them, if we're very lucky, we sometimes find crowned sand grouse, which is just an exceptionally difficult bird to actually get to grips with anywhere in its range. But over the last few years, it's become more reliable here on the edge of the Sahara, and probably represents the easiest opportunity to see this bird. Again, spectacular scenery, and these tamarisks down at the bottom of the picture. These areas of scrub are where you find some of the more interesting passerines that inhabit the edge of the Sahara here, as well as massive amounts of migrants. With these small oases on the edge of the desert, you'll find high concentrations of migrant warblers, shrikes, etc. And it really adds to the excitement of every morning, seeing which suite of birds has turned up overnight. Of course, the residents are where the real excitement is. Birds like greater hoopoo lark along the top row there, spectacular in its own right on the ground, but when it takes flight, those pied wings are just absolutely phenomenal. It's display flight, flying up high and then dropping with a whistle like a falling World War II bomb. It's just up there with the best birding experiences, in my opinion. Of course, the pallid African desert warbler down in the left corner there, barely distinguishable in the Saharan midday sun. Quite a strange warbler that spends a lot of its time feeding on the ground. Always a pleasure to spend time with. And of course the dapper desert sparrow, a real Moroccan specialty, and really quite an attractive bird, often occurring around camel dung. Of course, migrants and other special residents are varied and interesting. Birds like spectacled warbler here give abnormally good views on migration in open areas. Newly recognized subspecies and species such as the Saharan olivaceous warbler, as well as endemic residents like Temminck's horned lark here in the top right, a much more pallid white and black tan form of the horned lark, as well as Fulvus chatterer and the stunning local Maghreb magpie, very similar to the magpie found in Europe, but with that blazing bright blue eye skin. Just an absolutely fantastic looking bird. But it's very difficult, of course, to beat the phenomenal Musier's redstart with its black, white and red colour scheme. Truly a next level bird, and again almost worth it on its own. When it comes to enigmatic birds, nightjars are often up there amongst the top. Now, can you see the Egyptian nightjar in this photo? I'm sure some of you can already, but I'll put a box around it for you there. Now this is one of the least seen nightjars, I would say, in Africa. It takes a little bit of an effort, and being in the right locations, and even among cryptic birds within the family, this is up there as one of the more cryptic of the cryptic. Really lovely photo by Ken Behrens here, showing just how pallid and camouflaged the bird is. Of course, other nocturnal birds are around. We quite often bump into the Maghreb form of little owl, which is not uncommon in these deserts. Eurasian scops owl is often seen in the tamarisks early morning as a migrant moving up towards Europe at this time of year in March to April. But it's really the Pharaoh eagle owl that gets most of our attention as far as night hunters goes. Really a large, beautiful, pale form of an eagle owl, often found in these caves within dry riverbeds called wadis. It can take a little bit of time to locate, but when we do, the views tend to be quite spectacular. And of course, who can argue that the scenery is just out of this world? It's phenomenal. Sitting back with a tagine or some couscous in the evening and watching the stars rise above the Sahara with an incredible orange glow bouncing off of the dunes is one of the world's top experiences for anything, in my opinion.
Although it doesn't strictly fall under the category of a desert, here in Morocco, the desert stretches all the way to the coast. So you can be stood still in the dunes, still in the desert landscapes, looking directly at the Atlantic Ocean, which is quite exciting and gives rise to quite a few specialised species along the coast here. Obviously the most famous of all is the northern bald ibis. There's around 100 pairs left breeding in Morocco, with 2 pairs I believe now in Syria as the remaining wild population of this bird. So obviously there's a key target and a key focus of any time spent in the deserty coastal regions.
Now actually tracking down northern bald ibis can be a challenge in its own right. Access to the breeding colony is no longer permitted, so you have to scour the coast for these highly mobile birds. Here you can see a flock in the distance flying off away from us after giving really spectacular views in the low scrub along the coast here. And when you do get a good look, they're just absolutely unique. Even compared to southern bald ibis, this thing is an outlier, a very strange, curious looking, almost morose bird, but very, very worthwhile. Again, even on its own, would probably be worth a trip to Morocco. Of course, it's not the only thing worth looking at on the coast. There are several things worth stopping in for that we don't get to see in southern Africa. Birds like ordwins and slender-billed gulls, very common along the coast, especially this time of year, looking lovely and pink in the case of slender-billed gull. And of course some wildfowl. There's white-headed duck occasionally along the coast here, which is like a very large makoa duck, looking very brutish. And a marbled teal, another bird that is under threat, but here in Morocco is not uncommon in the core of its range.
So thanks for joining me. I hope that gives you a bit of a short and sweet overview of birding in the Maghreb deserts of northwest Africa. It's certainly been overlooked and not on the radar of southern African birders for too long, so I hope you'll consider it for a journey in the future. It's certainly rewarding, a lot of fun, some really great birds, excellent cultural and food experiences, and just all round a very, very pleasant trip for almost anybody, non-birding partners and friends included. So feel free to have a look at our online virtual stand here in the fair, or check out the website at tropicalbirding.com, and I hope to travel with some of you in the future. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you ever so much to Dom, Dan and Lyle for sharing these incredibly underrated birding destinations with us. When you are planning your next birding trip in Africa, make sure not to overlook these. Each of our speakers represents a tour operator that organizes birding trips all over the continent and indeed the world. So if you were suitably impressed by their knowledge, please make sure to visit their respective exhibitor booths in order to inquire about these destinations and the many others spread across Africa and the globe. I would like to thank our platinum sponsors, Zeiss, MEC Cruises, the Ford Wildlife Foundation, the AA and Italtile for making this event possible. We have a half-hour break in the program now for you to visit our exhibitor booths, bid on items in our silent auction, participate in our bird search game, and also peruse our various sponsor booths. After the break, we have a talk that should not be missed by any serious African birders, delivered by Dr. Callan Cohen, the founder of Birding Africa, and this is entitled Africa's Most Sought After Birds and some tips on how to find them. I'll see you there.